Hi, I'm Brooke, here with Inspire Virginia today to interview Secretary Rodrigues a little bit about her involvement in teen voter registration and also recent changes that we've begun to see take place right here in Virginia.
Welcome to the capital city. We're
Thank you
so
so
delighted to
much.
have you here.
Thank
You
you.
for being here today.
So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to become involved in election administration?
Well, I come from a unique background where English is not my first language, and my parents were immigrants to the United States. So I learned from a very early age how important it is to go out and vote. So, in all my entire life, I've been working in political campaigns, believe it or not, on both sides of the aisle. I often find it important to vote for the people who are best qualified in any given election. And in addition to this, I had the great honor of serving both under Governor Kaine, Tim Kaine, and Governor Bob McDonnell as the chief election officer in Virginia. So in 2008, I was able to oversee Virginia's largest election on record. So to me, elections are passionate. It really is the crux of what makes the United States, well, the great country we are in the world.
Great. Very cool. So I know in 2013, Governor McAuliffe appointed you Secretary of Administration. So could you tell us what exactly does the Secretary of Administration do and anything else that's related to that?
As Secretary of Administration, I have the best secretariat because I am really the backbone of state government. I handle all the assets for Virginia, including 11,000 buildings, and including the Capitol, which you see behind me, is one of the buildings, state buildings under our care, as well as all state employees, compensation board, which are our constitutional elected officers, and most importantly, elections, which is the cradle of democracy. So in my capacity as Secretary of Administration, I still get to work with the Chief Election Officer and the Department of Elections to ensure that Virginia elections are fair and open to all eligible voters.
Right, so you mentioned how you work very closely with election issues, and so I'm sure that you're very familiar with kind of the stereotype that young people can be apathetic and disengaged in the political process. And so I ask, over the years that you've been involved in election administration, how have you seen the political power and influence of young people change?
Well, I truly believe I've seen it building. And I believe millennials have set a new standard for all the young generations to come, younger generations to come. Millennials now make up 3 out of 10 eligible voters in the United States. That's 30%
Right.
of the voting population are millennials. This is the first time since us baby boomers have been around that youth has had the potential to really make a difference in this election. And I quite frankly think that through programs such as Inspire Virginia, we have really seen a civic engagement level in this age group that we have not seen before, where they are coming out together, registering to vote, and more importantly, actually showing up at the polls. I can give you an example, if you would like, of this past March 1st in the presidential election. Historically, we have that age category where they would equal other age categories in showing up. Well, millennials on March 1st showed up where they were twice the turnout than any other age group.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
60% of the
my goodness.
millennials showed up at the polls. The closest were the 65 and above, where about 30% of them showed. So again, if you're 3 out of 10 voters and you are showing up at 60%, it's easy to do the math. Math wasn't my strong suit, either in high school or in college, but I'm here to tell you, even I know that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, certainly. So how many millennials and the younger voter demographic usually turn out to vote each year?
Well, it really depends upon the election cycle.
Right.
What we have really been doing is becoming actively involved. This past year was the first year that Governor McAuliffe had issued a challenge at the high school level. And we actually had a challenge for high schools to register to vote. One of the uniqueness of Virginia law is that you can actually be 17 years old and vote in a primary election if you're going to be 18 on or before the general election. So normally we see about 3,000 to 4,000 17-year-olds in our database. Well, this year, with such push to get people to register to vote, even before Governor McAuliffe's push in the high schools, we actually had, instead of that normal 3,000 to 4,000, over 15,000 sign up and actually were registered to vote in the primary, even though they weren't eligible to vote in any other election. Right. They actually showed up. So it's very exciting.
That's incredible. So why do you personally think it's important for young people to vote?
You know, I think what happened recently in England should be a wake-up call to all millennials around the world.
Yeah.
Many of their young people did not go out and vote in that election, and they are suddenly realizing that their future has been determined without their age group having a voice. Now, I just told you 60% of millennials showed up in the last election. So you know that was more in the primary election.
Right.
So you know that was more than 1,000 voters, correct?
Yes.
Actually, it was about 11,000, just to let you know if you do the math. That being said, we have had elections in the Commonwealth of Virginia that have boiled down to less than 400 votes. The Attorney General's election was decided by less than 1,000 votes. We are talking the fact that 1 year the Attorney General's race was actually under 400 votes. So you tell me, based on that, do you think millennials can make a difference?
Certainly.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think it's so important because we are actually discussing their future.
Right.
But what's interesting to me is this year, it's really exciting. President of the United States, potentially the first woman running for President of the United States, definitely a clear choice in this election either way. However, next year, when we will be electing a governor for Virginia, we will also be electing a lot of members, all the members of the General Assembly, and most importantly, all county supervisors, school board. Now, for millennials, who makes the biggest difference in your life? Would it be the person who decides how many days a week you're going to go to school? how many hours you're going to go to school, what age you can have your driver's license. I mean, those are the individuals that are up for election next year.
Right.
So hopefully there's a lot of excitement. I remember voting the first time. I actually turned 18 the year that we elected a new president. So my first time, so I know how exciting that was. But the following year, since both Virginia and I'm originally from New Jersey have an election every year, it was a little, well, why do I really want to vote? And I suddenly realized, even at that age, that wait a second, that year I was actually going to vote for people who had a direct impact on me, on my everyday life.
Right.
So that's the important thing. And just to let you know, I guess coming from a family that my dad came here because he was fleeing a military dictatorship, I was always brought up knowing that he didn't have a chance to vote. And my parents never missed an election. I have never missed an election. So I think it's really an important piece of that, to make sure that if you don't vote, you can't complain.
Right, certainly. And we've definitely seen that play out. You mentioned briefly earlier this year's presidential election, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on how that's kind of influenced young people. We know that a lot of issues that are very important to them have come up recently, and I'm wondering if you think that this will kind of empower younger voters to not only show up for the presidential election, but also like elections for governor and other smaller positions in government.
I think it really depends upon the degree to which social media also helps. Millennials are much in tune and know some more issues rather than just depending upon a newspaper or television. I think it's more of a group activity, if you will. I think a lot of it will come to play. I really do believe millennials are a lot smarter than I was at that age, because they look at the world more globally. I mean, I recently, in my role, was visiting a college campus talking to state employees, and actually took part in a Skype that one of their classes was having with a group of students from Brazil. Wow. So that would never have happened when I was in school. So I think millennials are beginning to see the importance of what's happening in the world, and recognizing that a lot of the places that they deal with, there is not that ability to go out and vote. And when they ignore that ability to go out and vote, which is what happened in England, they are seeing direct consequences of what can happen if they do not. So I do believe millennials. I think the fact that 60% showed up in a presidential primary is unprecedented. Yeah. So I think they're on a roll. And I think if they continue to stay engaged, we know just by research, the earlier you vote in life, the more likely you are to be a lifelong voter. And we've made it easier for participation in government. You can now go online and update your voter registration. You can now vote or register to vote online, and you can also request an absentee ballot application. You can now do that online. So I think also what was interesting is in the research that I see from that March 1st primary, people under 25 were more likely to vote absentee and apply for it online than the older generation who would actually show up at the polls.
So is there anything else that your office is doing to encourage and kind of make young people feel more involved in the political process? I know that you mentioned kind of using those social media platforms to reach out to them, but are there any other initiatives that you guys have been taking?
Absolutely. One of the things is that we've partnered a great deal with Inspire Virginia.
Right.
And I have been out to many of the schools. We also work very closely with Virginia 21. And just to let you know, it's not only young people. I have traveled the state and talked with chambers of commerce. I always have voter registration forms in my car. I am going out later this summer to a Latino group called Valhem to really talk about the importance of voting. It really is so important that all of us become knowledgeable and go out and vote. That's the only way individuals are going to listen to what you have to say. And certainly there has been great involvement by young people in the primary. And I think you've seen both major candidates trying to woo now millennials because they have seen the fact of how many showed up to vote in an election.
Certainly.
You've seen it yourself, correct?
Right.
So I think that's the answer to your question. Yes, I don't think up until this primary, when we proved in Virginia that millennials will show up and it's important to get them registered to vote, that people really came out and have started to woo this younger generation.
Right, and in doing that, what do you think are some issues that seem important to young voters that candidates should be more aware of and more focused on as a ways of kind of connecting to that generation?
Student debt.
Yes.
Student debt, I think, is something I hear all the time involved. I also think that the educational opportunities, making colleges affordable for students, but there are certainly women's health issues that are important. There's also the immigration issue.
Yes.
For many of us. In the interest of full disclosure, my father was undocumented when he came to America. So I understand the need to flee a military dictatorship and the true meaning of the Statue of Liberty. And I do believe that these are issues that are so important to your generation because, again, it is a global nation. When I talk and I look at my own family, my daughter-in-law is from Colombia and she speaks very little English. I mean, we are a global country. And so I do think that is something that is a little different about millennials. And also because of the social media. To us, the biggest act of adulthood was getting your driver's license. The biggest act of adulthood with millennials is getting your own phone.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's just that look on how we view the world differently. But at the end of the day, we want clean water, we want to be educated, we wanted to be treated fairly, and we all wanted to live in a safe and welcoming community. And that is really why it's important to vote, because there are individuals that have different interests on how the world is looked at. And no one should tell you how to vote. It is up to every citizen. There's a responsibility that the voter needs to become educated and understand that the issues that are important to them. So getting engaged, understanding the issues, and understanding what's important to you. And it's okay if you and I differ. Because at some point, if we have those differing viewpoints and we can come together and find common ground, then that's the way that we have made this country and this Commonwealth a great Commonwealth. For instance, this year our governor worked with the Republicans and the Democrats, and we came up with some gun reform. Now, neither side was completely happy, but at the end of the day, we were able to make Virginia safer. And that's what I'm talking about. And the only reason people were able to do that is they know there's an election coming up too. So that's why it's so important to vote and to let the elected officials know that your generation has a voice and they're going to use it.
Finally, is there anything else that you would like to add or say to young voters about their voting habits or their importance to Virginia?
The future is yours. I will not be here in 50 years, and I'm giving myself a whole lot of extra time. I am probably not going to be here in 30 years. So the reality is you are. And I can do my best to leave a good Virginia for you, but I'm not going to be here forever. It's going to be up to you all to do it. Don't let what happened in England happen to you all. I'm not saying it was a right decision or a wrong decision. All I'm hearing is millennials saying, wait a second, we want a second vote. You only get one bite at the apple. There are no redos when it comes to an election. If your vote didn't matter, then we would not have seen the closeness that we did in the primaries, where it really went to the wire. If more millennials had shown up, I think it would have been more divisive. I mean, there would have been a clear definition. So my advice to you is, I believe I have made a difference in my state, in my country, and in the world. And I think that I've done that by not only voting, but supporting people in leadership positions that have truly gone on to do great things. So I think I can point to great leaders and say they were great leaders because in part they got there with my vote. So do not miss an opportunity to change the world's destiny, the state's destiny, but more importantly, your own destiny by voting for people that you think will make the world a better place, this state the great state that it is, but more importantly, your community that you're going to live and raise a family in. So that's my advice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight and all of the facts on teen voters and really encouraging us to go out and vote. Once again, I'm Brooke.
And I'm Nancy Rodrigues, Secretary of Administration.